I want to go back to some of what Kathleen talked about earlier as far as performance management, and a couple of concepts that I think that supervisors are going to want to know about that we do follow at the Research Foundation. The first one is employment at will, and I'm sure many supervisors have heard about employment at will and wonder what it is. So basically it's a doctrine that states that an employment relationship between an employee and an employer may be terminated by the employee or the employer at any time and for any reason or for no reason at all. However, when I say that, this doctrine of employment at will really does provide some protections, certain protections to employees. They can be terminated at will, but not for the reasons that we have on this slide, which is a discriminatory reason, and I've given you some examples of that. They can't be terminated out of retaliation for performing a legally protected action, and I've given you some examples of that. And they cannot be terminated if the employee has an employment contract that outlines the terms of employment, including termination. So in other words, the contract terms supersede the employment at will doctrine. Next, I want to talk about a few steps, and there are several here, and I think this will be a really good reminder for you as a supervisor, steps that you can take to minimize the employer's liability for any adverse employment actions. You want to ensure that when you're meeting with and talking with your employees that you make sure that employment expectations for your employees are very clear. They know what they're doing, they know what their job is. You want to be able to use disclaimers, including the at-will language in the new hire process, which would include in offer letters, in new employee orientation meetings, and I want to also let you know that there is at-will language in our employee handbook. You want to make sure that you're following the RF's progressive discipline policy and guidelines, and those are on our website in the policy and procedures section of the website. And you want to follow these basically to demonstrate that if there is a termination, that you have a valid, non-discriminatory reason for the termination. You want to make sure, as part of the progressive discipline policy, that you are documenting any disciplinary actions that you're taking. You also want to involve your human resources office in this disciplinary process. Many times supervisors feel like they can just, across the board take actions against employees, and it's just always a really good idea to have human resources as your advisor in any of these matters so that we can avoid claims at SDHR or EEOC. And you also want to be sure that you're engaging, if the Employee Relations Office is in your HR office on campus, you'd want to be talking with them specifically, and also legal counsel, prior to making any decisions or taking any adverse actions against, an employee. So as I said before, progressive discipline, I know it sounds like it's a very negative concept, but it really isn't. It's a method that a supervisor or a coach can use to attempt to address an employee's performance and or behavior issues. And the key to it is to make sure that the employee is aware that they have a performance or a behavior issue, and then to give them the opportunity to improve in order to become successful in the position. And that's why I don't look at progressive discipline as something negative. It's something that a supervisor sees that they want to help the employee become better and improve on. So I look at it as a positive method. Some of the principles of progressive discipline are that it is corrective. And by that I mean that it's not punitive. We don't want it to be punitive. We want it to be positive and corrective. We want to make sure that it's fair and consistent. So for an example, Jerry, as a supervisor, he may need to verbally counsel an employee for being late twice in 1 week. And then 2 weeks later, he's got another employee who does the same thing, and he doesn't, verbally counsel them. So that may not be the best action. What I'm saying here is that in order to be fair and consistent, you want to treat these matters, between employees in a consistent manner. And another one of the principles of progressive discipline is to provide in all of your dealings with employees, to give them a chance to talk about their side of the story. You never know why that employee might have been late twice, in 1 week. They may have had a pet die. They may have a grandmother who's gone into the hospital. You have no idea unless you talk to that person and you find out what's their side of the story. Maybe they have a valid reason. So I want to move on to the steps of progressive discipline. And again, I just want to say that all of this information is provided very clearly in our policy and our guidelines on implementing progressive discipline. So the first step of progressive discipline is a verbal counseling, and I think we've talked about those before, where they're verbal discussions with your employee who may have been late, 3 times in 1 week, and then the next week they're late twice, by a half an hour. That's an instance of, the supervisor looking at that and saying, I want to talk to this employee because I want to find out why they're late first, but I also want to let them know that, that's not professional and it's not appropriate behavior, and that something needs to change so that we can improve their attendance at work. The second step is written counselings, and this would be, in the same example that I used, would be if the pattern of coming in late continued. Say someone was late, twice in 1 week, and then 3 weeks later they were late an hour, and this pattern just kept, after the verbal counseling you've given them, they just keep doing it. And you know that you need to speak to them, but at this point, it's also something that you may want to put in writing. And in our guidelines, we do talk about the things that should be included in a written counseling. Step 3 is a performance improvement plan. And this is, we're moving into an area where we still have the thought that it's positive and we're going to improve this employee's behavior or their performance in certain areas, but they're at a point where the verbal counselings and the written counselings just haven't been successful. They're not, meeting your expectations for performance or behavior. So we would want to move to what's called a performance improvement plan, or better known as a PIP. Again, the guidelines for creating these documents for employees, you can talk to your HR office, and I'm sure they'd be happy to work with you on these. We also work at central office with campuses on performance improvement plans. So if an employee has gotten to this point and during a period of, say, 30, 60, or 90 days, they have not improved their performance or behavior, we would move to step 4 of progressive discipline. And this is the one that we don't like to move to, but sometimes we need to, and that's termination of employment.
Barbara, is there ever a case where, do you always need to follow step 1 through 4, or are there times that you might not go in order?
Great question, Kate, and that also is covered in our policy, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit here. This is not something that you have to follow step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4 in that order. If you have someone who just is not meeting the expectations of their position in several areas, they have, behavior issues on top of that, you could actually go straight to a performance improvement plan. You could skip, if you've seen that, an employee has not been, getting to work on time, and it's over the course of a period. Hopefully you would have talked to them, but you could move to a written counseling if it's that egregious. If they're just not showing up or not calling in, you could, go straight to a written counseling without using a verbal. Rarely do we go straight to termination unless we have good cause for that. And some of the examples I can think of that good cause would be true insubordination of not, doing what your supervisor or manager has asked you to do. You've refused to do it. Someone who has stolen company property and you have caught them doing that, so you have firsthand knowledge of it, where you don't need to do an investigation, you could go straight to a termination. And there are many other examples, and those examples are provided in our policy.
Can I just say one thing too?
Absolutely.
I think, Barbara, that I've also seen people receive a verbal warning and turn the behavior around.
Absolutely.
I've also seen people get performance improvement plans and they didn't realize how serious the issues were with their work, and they've turned that around. I mean, the point of this is not, like you said, to get to termination. It's to actually help people with the feedback to be better at their job. But in some cases, when people are not engaged, and we often see this with new hires between month 2 and month 4, people are missing work, they're late, they seem distracted, they're not asking for work. I mean, those are usually signs that somebody is engaged with something on the outside, maybe another job offer or interviewing. Or let's face it, when we're new at a job, we're going to try to knock the socks off of our supervisor our first 6 months. We're going to work hard. We want to have a good reputation. So the warning signs really do show up. There's research around that between month 2 and month 4. And the worst thing we could do would be to ignore it. The best thing we can do is to be clear about, hey, there's a problem. You've only been here 2 months. You've been out already 6 times. What's going on? And I find open-ended questions really help get people to that place. So I just want to mention that. I've seen people successful even after this, too.
I agree. I have witnessed the same myself, and it's really a principle that we like to look at as positive and helping the employee. Any other questions? We'll move on to engagement and morale, speaking of that.
Yeah, so this is sort of the end of our session. I just wanted to put a slide in to let folks know who are watching that we have a lot of ways to engage with you and to help you really have a great experience here at the RF. We have engagement teams on campuses. We have Leadership Academy, we have the mentoring program, we have Learning Tuesdays, we have professional development planning, we have open chairs. So steal that concept, use it on your campus. We also offer SPA fundamentals. So for new hires who have been here less than 1 year, we've got probably 100 licenses for people to use so that you could learn more about sponsored programs, administration, and those are of no cost to you. So I just really wanted you to know that engagement is key. I think as a manager, you want to make sure that you're checking out how engaged people are. When you see something, maybe at a staff meeting, I know I've done that before where I thought, gee, something just didn't go right. Even though I'm really busy, I circle back and say, hey, I noticed that seemed to bother you. Is everything okay? I mean, let's face it, the number one reason why people leave their job is because of their supervisor. So if that's the truth, and we're all supervisors, then we have to work really hard at being good at this. Does not come naturally to anybody. We have to work at it and constantly challenge ourselves to say, the team I have is good, I want to make them great. And so the care and the time into those relationships, I think, is what makes people stay at their job.